Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to look at the AlphaZero game between Stockfish 8 played last year. And this game is another example of AlphaZero's attacking play, but also strategical play. In this game it follows a similar opening to my last video, but as you'll see AlphaZero goes for a different approach this time to Stockfish. But here in this game AlphaZero is white, Stockfish 8 is black, and AlphaZero starts again with knight to f3, and we get into a similar game to the previous. Stockfish plays e6, AlphaZero plays c4, knight to f6, knight to c3, and bishop b4 again from Stockfish. So again trying to double the pawns on the c file, but AlphaZero plays queen c2 to stop this. After castles, a3, bishop takes c3, queen takes c3, a5 is played to stop any b4 ideas, and AlphaZero now grabs the centre with d4. b6 is played by Stockfish to fianchetto the bishop to b7, and here AlphaZero plays bishop to g5 to pin that knight on f6. d6 is played by Stockfish, e3 from AlphaZero, and bishop b7 from Stockfish. AlphaZero develops with bishop to d3, and Stockfish attacks the bishop on g5 with the h6 pawn. The bishop retreats and knight bd7 is played, and here both sides have really good development, no problems for either side at the moment. Really solid from black as well. Notice the only pawn above the 6th rank is this a5 pawn to stop b4 ideas, and at the moment we've got some solid computer play. But here we come across an interesting move now from AlphaZero. He plays knight to d2, and as in the previous game AlphaZero is now sacrificing this g2 pawn, a very similar theme, obviously trying to get the open g file once the bishop captures on g2. And as Matthew Sadler notes in his Game Changer book, a human probably wouldn't take that g2 pawn, it would be deemed too risky, especially open up the g file, but computers are very happy to take it. The only alternative move I could find here for black that seems to be good was c5, and after castles, queen c7 and f3 we get into a different game completely, where white's trying to now dominate the centre and possibly reroute the bishop back to f2. And it's quite an even game for both sides. But in this game, Stockfish now took on g2 with the bishop, and of course AlphaZero plays rook to g1 and the bishop retreats, and here AlphaZero now reveals their plan. They play bishop to c2 with the idea of playing queen d3 as a battery and perhaps attacking on h7, but also rerouting the bishop to a4 to attack the knight on d7. This is because the bishop pins this knight on f6 and it will just overload the d7 knight. So in the game Stockfish now plays queen to e8 to get off this diagonal, and d5 is now played by AlphaZero, opening up more lines. The major threat here now is bishop takes f6, followed by knight takes f6 and queen takes f6, because this rook pins this g-pawn. In the game Stockfish now played e5, blocking everything up, but this does seem very passive. Other ideas that Stockfish could have played maybe king h8, but here actually knight to e4 is just an incredibly strong move. And if now, for example, e5 here, AlphaZero can play knight takes f6, followed by knight takes f6. After bishop takes f6, g takes f6, we can just play queen to d3, threatening mate on h7. If e4, simply just capture, capture and capture, and white's a pawn up and in a very decent endgame, and black's got these two doubled pawns, so this is an easy win for AlphaZero, and they should be able to convert this. So after king h8 and knight to e4, knight h5 is another option to protect the g7 pawn. But here white's got actually an amazing move. They can just play rook takes g7, and if knight takes g7, in comes knight to f6, an amazing move. This is because after knight takes f6, queen takes f6, this h6 pawn hangs, and queen h7 is coming very quickly because this bishop on c2 has got a nice scope. So after rook takes g7, knight takes g7, after knight to f6, Black could also opt for a move like queen to d8, but then would just come knight h5, and mate on g7 is threatened, and the queen on d8 is also under attack. After f6, white can play queen to d3, again threatening mate on h7, and if you try and block it with knight to f5, just simply d takes e6, and the f5 knight is lost, and h7 is still a massive threat, and black's in a lot of trouble in this position. Also the e6 pawn attacks this knight on d7, black's got a lot of problems to solve. Again, after rook takes g7, knight takes g7, knight to f6, queen e7 is another option that black could play. But after queen d4, trying to reroute the queen to f4 and attack h6. After knight to f5, bishop captures, e takes f5, knight d7 check. It looks like black's again in a lot of trouble. After f6, just bishop takes f6, rook takes, knight takes, and it looks like white's got a good game. White's actually a pawn up here, and after a move like king g7, knight h5, king g6, knight f4, king f7, white's just going to castle and try and convert this endgame, and with this terrible bishop on b7 it should be an easy work for AlphaZero. So again, all those variations occurred after this position and black played king h8. Instead here though, Stockfish played the very passive e5, just blocking up some files, and here AlphaZero now just castles queenside after sacrificing their pawn. They're trying to get the king to safety. So in the game, Stockfish now played king h8, trying to get the king off his g file, but Matthew Sadler thought a move like b5 would be a lot better. In another game, AlphaZero now played queen to b3, and after b4 just played queen to d3, which forces the b pawn to advance, and after g6 AlphaZero played f4, king h7 and rook df1. After knight c5, queen e2, captures, knight fd7, AlphaZero played f5, e4 was played, and rook f4 from AlphaZero. Here followed queen to e5, knight takes e4, queen to a1 check and king d2. And after queen takes g1, knight takes c5, knight takes c5, white actually can trap the queen with rook to f1, and in this game AlphaZero actually went on to win the game in 56 moves. So even b5 isn't a saving grace in this position. So Stockfish played king h8, getting off the g file, and now bishop to a4 was played by AlphaZero, threatening to take on f6 with the bishop because that d7 knight is now pinned. So knight h7 was played, and now f4, trying to open more lines and put pressure on black's centre, and for this reason f6 was played. But as we'll see now, AlphaZero cleverly plays bishop to c2, and what black's done is here put all their pawns on dark squares, and this frees this white bishop up. But this isn't AlphaZero's main plan. AlphaZero now wants black to play f5 and e4 to try and shut down his own c2 bishop, but this would release the queen on c3 to attack on g7. So black can't have it both ways. He's either got to weaken the white squares or the dark squares. In the game, Stockfish now played knight to c5, and AlphaZero played knight to b3. And after captures, black has just traded off their best minor piece, and their two minor pieces that are left are absolutely terrible. This bishop's terrible, this knight is terrible, and AlphaZero's got two nice bishops to work with. And as you'll see, the main idea now is to play bishop to g6, followed by queen to c2 to create some sort of battery against black's pieces. And for this reason, Stockfish now plays e4 to block the bishop in. But after rook g2, rook g8, and rook d4 to attack e4, black is now forced to play f5, and after rook d1, AlphaZero has their first victory. They've managed to open up the dark squares for this queen, and this g7 pawn is now a massive target. Queen h5 is played by Stockfish, but just bishop to e1 to reroute this bishop to c3. Queen h3 is played, and just rook d2 to protect everything. And after knight to f6, bishop to d1. In the book Game Changer by Matthew Sadler and Natasha Regan, it says AlphaZero is in absolutely no hurry. It deals with all of Stockfish's activity and understands that the structure is long term. So black's got a long term weakness and white's just riding out the storm for now. Plays rook af8, and rook df2 from AlphaZero, knight h5, and just king b1 to try and put the king to relative safety. Bishop c8 was played by Stockfish, and here bishop takes h5 was played. After queen takes h5, just bishop c3, and here we've got a very Karpovian position, because all AlphaZero is doing now is shutting down black's counterplay, and this could come in the form of g5, and that's all white needs to do now. This g7 pawn is a weakness long term. This bishop is never going to get moved off that c3 square, and white just needs to get their pieces on the other side of the board to the king side to attack. So king h7 was played here, possibly trying to play a g6 or a g5 move, but h4 is played by AlphaZero, stopping any g5 ideas. But what happens if Stockfish takes this pawn? Well, if queen takes, queen d1 can be played. After something like rook f7, queen g1, bishop d7, just rook g3. After queen e7, just play rook g6. And the idea now for AlphaZero is to play rook to h2, followed by bishop takes g7, and this h6 pawn will eventually hang due to the two rooks and the lack of this pawn on g7 once the bishop takes it. So after h4, again black can't capture this pawn, so instead Stockfish plays bishop to d7 here. AlphaZero plays rook to g1, and Stockfish here plays king to h8. It was noted here that maybe Stockfish should actually play a4 here to attack the queen, because after queen c2, black still has some opportunity for counterplay with b5 and c6 and maybe rook to b8. But after a move like king h8, AlphaZero now just plays a4, and this completely shuts down any counterplay for black. The pawns on the queen side are completely blocked off, and it's made it 100 times easier for white to win this game. King h7 from Stockfish, and rook fg2 from AlphaZero. Rook f7 to guard this g7 pawn, and AlphaZero keeps their king safe with king a2. Queen f3, but just bishop d4 to protect the e3 pawn. Bishop to e8, and queen to c2 is played by AlphaZero. Queen h5 from Stockfish, and rook h2, maybe to protect h4. Rook d7, king a3, and queen f7 was played here. Another move here was actually rook to e7, but I think white would follow it with b3 to guard everything, and after rook d7, queen c1, we're getting to this interesting variation where black just moving their rook from side to side, but slowly after rook g3, rook hg2, queen g1, and finally g6, white could play something like rook g5, and after h takes, rook f8, white can play rook h2, and after something like king b2, queen g3, rook e7, bishop f6, rook d7 and rook h4, white's just getting their pieces into optimum positions, and after queen h3, rook takes f6, g takes, queen takes h4, queen takes h4, king g8, white's actually got a better position here, and you'd think that AlphaZero will be able to convert a game like this. But here Stockfish plays queen to f7, just guarding everything and getting it off this weird h5 square. And h5 now from AlphaZero to stop any g5 or g6 ideas. Queen f8, queen d1, and here Stockfish now plays g5, trying to gain some counterplay and weakening their own position, but after h takes g6, rook takes g6, rook g5, remember that pawn on h6 is pinned by this rook, rook f7 to protect f5, b3 protects everything, rook e7, queen h1 now, and rook d7, and bishop to c3. White's just slowly increasing their own position, and if black stays really passive here, white's idea is just to simply play rook h4, queen h3, and start ganging up on this weak f5 pawn, and black will have no reply to it. And I'll just go through the next sort of 40 moves relatively quickly, because they're all basically computer moves, just poking at each other and side shifting pieces to try and get optimum play. So c6 is actually played by Stockfish, rook takes g6, bishop takes g6, and d takes c6, rook c7, and here king b2. Stockfish captures on c6, and AlphaZero plays queen to d1. Bishop to e8 is played, rook g2 to get the open file, bishop g6, and now queen to d5. So getting this queen into a decent square. Queen c8, king a2, and now here's where some of the shifting starts occurring. Just bishop b2, king h7, king b1, queen to e8, and both sides are just sort of shifting around here, trying to feel each other out. So just moves a bit back and forth with the kings, and this is actually typical computer play. You'd never see humans sort of doing this sort of position. But after many moves, white does get into like a decent optimum position, and he realised that I have to get the king to the other side of the board. So king c1 is the start, king d2, and slowly AlphaZero now creeps the king over to g3. So white's idea here is simple, just play king h4, bishop a3, and attack this d6 pawn, and black's in a lot of trouble. If black plays a move like king h7 here, white can play king h3, king h6, and king h4. After king h7 here, white now has the incredible move b4, so aiming at the other side of the board. And if a takes b4, a5, b takes a5 will be a massive mistake here due to queen a7 check. After king h6, just play queen d7 attacking the rook. Rook moves to c5, and just queen e6, and there's no way for black actually to defend that bishop, and it's game over. The queen literally has no squares to defend because this bishop is just so powerful, and this queen covers off all the other squares. So that would have been an amazing win. Here though, black could actually retreat. Rook c8 can be played. After queen takes b6, rook takes c4, white can play a6 and get a queen. If rook c2 to gain some counterplay, just a7, and if captures, just queen b7 check, and after queen g7 just promote to a queen, and it's game over. So black has to be very careful, and that's why I can't play king h7. That's just an example of how powerful white's position is and how passive black's is. In the game though, rook c5 was played, and now just bishop to a3 from AlphaZero, and it looks like it's already over. After rook c6, just queen d5 attacking the rook, and there's no way to defend the rook and this d6 pawn at the same time. And Stockfish is forced to play queen c8, bishop takes d6 is played by AlphaZero, and they finally won the pawn back. King h7 now, and bishop e5. Just look how powerful that bishop is on e5 now. Rook e6, king h3, and queen c6. And here AlphaZero plays rook g1. The queens are finally traded, and rook e8 is played by Stockfish, and AlphaZero maintains control by gaining the open file. Bishop f7 to attack the pawn, but AlphaZero has got it all figured out now. Rook c7 to pin the bishop, and after king g6, AlphaZero is just in time with rook d7 to protect the pawn. After bishop g8 just plays rook d6 check, and AlphaZero gains another pawn. After rook d8 just plays d6, king e6, and rook to b5, trying to win this other pawn. Stockfish plays rook a8, rook to b7, king to d5, and just king h4, hoping to win this h5 pawn. And this looks like it's game over already. I think a human player could actually beat Stockfish from this position. After king takes h5, bishop e6, rook a7. There's no way to save the a5 pawn. After bishop d7, AlphaZero goes for the jugular with bishop to f6. And after rook f8, just rook takes d7. And here Stockfish resigned, or the game was adjudicated in favour of AlphaZero. And AlphaZero just has too many pawns, and the king's just coming to g5 next, and this a5 pawn is just too weak as well. So this should be an easy mop-up session for AlphaZero. Apologies for not being able to commentate on every single move, there's just far too many to take into account. But I think this was one of the key positions where AlphaZero now just plays f4, and after f6 just plays bishop c2, and white's got a very nice position. And after swapping these two knights off and playing rook d4, it makes black's position so passive after rook d1. This c3 square is just become incredibly weak, and the dark squares around the king have just become susceptible to white's attack. And of course after bishop c3, I feel as though AlphaZero has full control of this position, and it's just very interesting to watch. I'm certainly going to take into account AlphaZero's positional lessons here. So it looks as though if we play this opening as white, we could sacrifice the pawn on g2 in a lot of our games and gain really nice positional edge over our opponents. That's something to take into account. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please drop a like and a subscribe if you did, and I'd love to hear what your comments are on this video. I try to reply to every single comment, and it would really help the channel. Anyway, I'll see you next time with another AlphaZero video. Thank you very much.